you want to understand somebody, don't listen to their words. Instead, see where they spend their time and money. That's the premise of this year's Greater Louisville Project Report. Looking at our investment in our citizens across the social, public, and private sectors, we can see that our peers, communities with similar resources and similar needs, are making different choices. Particularly in the social and public spheres, many of our peers are investing more than we are, and many of them are getting better outcomes. The key takeaway: Louisville has the capacity to invest more in ourselves. Understanding that level of investment is ultimately hopeful, because it means that we too could make different choices and potentially get better results. How we respond to the global pandemic and the civic awakening that are transforming our country and our community will define the next generation of our civic life. We can choose to hunker down and shepherd our resources with a scarcity mentality, and that is doubtless the choice that many, if not most, of our peers will make. Or we can choose to invest in new and different ways. We can choose to invest in a better Louisville. The Greater Louisville Project is a consortium of donors committed to using objective data to spur civic action. By tracking Louisville's progress across 4 deep drivers: education, 21st century jobs, health, and quality of place, we seek to inform our civic agenda by providing a common language and a common set of metrics to define progress. This analysis was sparked because the Greater Louisville Project's 15-year milestone report, released in 2019, indicated that we were not making the progress we wanted as a community across our deep drivers. We made modest gains in education, basically held steady in jobs, did all right in quality of place, and went down in health. More than that, even within the progress we are making, there are important and persistent gaps across race and geography. Those gaps particularly impact Black Louisvillians and those living in neighborhoods of concentrated poverty in the West and South Ends, making it more difficult for them to reach their full potential. And because of the persistent and systemic barriers making it more difficult for many Louisvillians, our community as a whole is not reaching its full potential. So the question is why? One aspect of that question is following the money. It's simply a matter of resources. Do other communities have more to invest than we do? The answer is no, but many of our peers are investing differently than we are. Now, I want to take a second to talk about why we use a framework of peer cities to do our analysis whenever we can. Peer cities are cities who are like us across several important dimensions. And every 10 years, we adjust those peers to be sure they're still relevant. We use that framework not because we want to beat those peers. As one of GLP's longstanding board members likes to say, there's no winning being a city, just as there's no winning marriage or winning happiness. But using a peer city framework gives us a sense of what's possible. It lets us see what is working or not working in similar places. It also gives us a sense of what is the return on our civic investment relative to national trends or across individual idiosyncrasies. In this report, we focus on the level of community investment. The concept of community investment is that to a certain extent, whether money flows through the private sector, the social sector, or the public sector is less important than whether the overall level of investment is getting us the return we want in our jobs, education, health, and quality of place. As we look at the data, what we see is that our private sector, often thought of as the generator of resources, is pretty typical of our peers. And in some cases, we outperform them. Out of our 17 peer cities, we rank 8th in number of Fortune 1000 companies, 9th in volume of small business loans, 7th in venture capital investments, and 8th in median earnings. While we underperform in some areas like community development financial institutions and federally subsidized SBA loans, for the large part, the private sector, we are in the middle of our peers. But when we look to the social sector, when we first analyzed the receipts of locally headquartered nonprofits relative to our peers, what we found was, according to IRS data reported on the 990s, Louisville was at the bottom tier of our peers, 16th out of 17 in terms of donations received. As we circulated that information to our stakeholders, we found that most nonprofit leaders were either not surprised, that's why it's so hard, or relieved. It's not just me that's having this trouble. But many donors and philanthropists push back, saying, well, that can't be right. We must give more to churches, or we're a global city. We must give abroad. So we decided to drill down into the sources of nonprofit funding. What we found was that among households with income of more than $200,000, 97.5% of which itemized their taxes, Louisville ranked in the top tier in terms of the number of people who donated, but at the very bottom, 16th out of 17, in terms of the percentage of their income they donated. To get very concrete, Louisvillians donated 3.5% of their income on average, compared to 4.5% that was our peer city mean, and 7% that was the highest of our peers. For context, if we were at our peer city mean, that would mean that we had an additional $75 million per year to invest in our citizens. And if we were to give slightly more than our peer city average, 5% of income, that would translate into more than $100 million per year. And endowed philanthropy, the other source of those donations, born of the wealth generated in this city, cannot make up that gap. For there too, we are at the bottom of our peers, 15th out of 17. In the public sector, the analysis was the most complicated because city and county budgeting is difficult to standardize. But across two different methodologies and verified by a third external expert, Louisville ranks near the bottom of our peer cities in terms of public investment, where our peer cities like St. Louis, Nashville, and Cincinnati rank near the top. So where do we go from here? As we've been talking to stakeholders across our community, a community that has been rocked by a combination of COVID and civic action, I've been struck by two things: a sense of pride and a sense of possibility. As we attempt to reckon squarely with the injuries of the past and awaken to the injustices of the present, particularly for our communities of color, we still believe that this town can be a place where all people have the ability to thrive, where all people have a sense of belonging and hope. This report clearly shows that we have the capacity to invest more in ourselves. So the question we must ask is, what would it take to unlock that capacity? As we grapple with the implications of COVID and needed civic changes, what kind of a future do we want? How do we come together to build a better Louisville? Every community is made up of people, and all data is made up of their stories. When we tell this story in the future, the story of how Louisville responded in this pivotal moment, what is the story we will tell? The question we are asking you, and the question I hope you will ask of all the people around you, is if you could invest in one thing to make Louisville better, what would it be? Then let's go do that thing together.